You are now watching the True Mets Talk podcast, talking New York Mets baseball 24/7, 365 with your host, CP.
With the shout to right field, stumbling start for Stewart. Drilled to deep left field by Alvarez, and that's
He's
going to
homered
go
in
4 straight games for the second time in his. He's homered in 4.
What's up, Mets fans? It's your boy CP, and welcome back to the True Mets Talk podcast. We have a very special podcast edition here for you all, previewing Game 2 of the Mets vs. Brewers series. I got my guy Logan here, avid Brewers fan. We are in the great state of Wisconsin right here in Milwaukee. We will be at the game today. Logan, first time on the podcast. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Chris. Very happy to be here. Longtime listener of the podcast, about 8 months, but still loving it. Love the content you put out on a daily basis, essentially throughout the season. So really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we're going to be talking about a series in which the Brewers already took Game 1 from the New York Mets. Game 1 obviously was not kind to the Mets from the start. Sean Manaea had a very tough time in the first inning. Familiar foe Rhys Hoskins hits the grand slam in the first inning. It was a 30-plus pitch first inning for Sean Manaea, and he simply did not have it working. I guess we can talk about last night's kind of performance here first before we get into a little bit of a preview today. We do have the starters. We don't have the lineups just yet, as it is only just afternoon here in the great state of Wisconsin. But yesterday, again, such a crucial, I guess, component for the Brewers to get off to such a strong start. But the thing that perplexes me from the Mets side is that, the Brewers aren't playing for anything. They're locked into the 3 seed. You're going up against a guy and a starter in Frankie Montas, who is 7-11 at that point going into yesterday with a 4.85 ERA. You got to get some runs on the board, especially early. And all of the at-bats, basically, that I saw in the first inning from the Mets, especially a 3-0 count to Pete Alonso, who decides to ground out in a 3-0 count, was just simply not great. So,
No.
What was the feeling like for you in terms of the actual start that the Brewers got yesterday?
Whenever the Brewers get people on base, I get excited. Years past, we left so many guys on base, and something unique about this team is that we just get the runs. It's not always pretty.
Yeah.
But we find a way to get runs. And that's the sport of baseball right there. You
Yeah.
got to find ways to get your guys on home. But yeah, love that. And Rhys Hoskins, can we just talk about 3 grand slams? I believe it's I want to say 9 grand slams on the season for the Brew Crew.
Yep.
Just electric hitting, and something that I really want to bring up. Bryce Terang having a quietly weird and great game. I think he put on, I think he was on base 5 times, 3 walks, a single. That's just something that you can't win without Bryce Terang, I think, is the main thing. He's been just an absolute stud at second base this whole season.
Yep.
Honestly, should be an all-star, but that's my take. But as a scorned Brewers fan, but would love to see a real team effort from the Brew Crew. I'm really excited to see what they can do today.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you. Terang is an absolute stud. I think congratulations to him on achieving 50 steals as of last night as well, which is absolutely huge. A lot of speed on this Brewers team. I believe the broadcast, Gary, Keith, and Ron for the Mets broadcast said that the Brewers are about 80% successful on the base paths in terms of stolen bases. You got Jackson Chourio as well, who is just an absolute menace out there with his speed. Speed all up and down the lineup for the Brewers, and they have definitely gotten the best of the New York Mets, especially in prior years. Obviously I was at the opening series. It's kind of a full circle moment that I'm here to end the season, or I guess not end because we have the doubleheader tomorrow or on Monday against the Braves. But again, this is a pesky team in the Brewers, a small market team, a lot of turnover this past offseason. And I think especially for you all, did you expect to even be here at this point with how much turnover they had in the offseason?
So my biggest fear was when we transitioned from Craig Counsell to Pat Murphy. You think changing up managers always a risky time for a ball club. So I was a little worried about that, but the more you got to hear him throughout the offseason, we were like, oh, we're really building something special here. And I'm blanking on the name of our pitching coach, but he is just fantastic. And he's found a way to really make a bullpen that by name sounds awful. Jared Koenig as a starter, who'd have thought a year ago that would have been potentially a damn good starter, or hell, even a reliever. But we find ways to get our bullpen regardless of how much we're paying him or hell, if we bring him up out of the AAA. But, the prospects have been great this year. Churio, and the second year guys, mainly in Terang, Frelick, although he's had a little bit of a slump towards the end of the season. And Garrett Mitchell, oddly, just kind of coming in and just being an absolute stud when we need him to be, either at the DH or in the outfield. But it's truly been great. I mean, and especially midseason with Christian Yelich, I mean, in MVP form.
Yeah, really good.
Hell, he was playing better than he did in his 2018 season and his two snub seasons, 19 and 20. But I will say it was an absolute pleasure to watch him get back to form. Tragic to see him exit. But you know what? With the Brewers, thing I love about them, prospects and the rookies, the second years, they all came in and they made this team what they are today. So,
yeah.
Love to see it.
Absolutely. And I think that for us Mets fans, we're starting to see this sort of, I guess, working of the classic Brewers, I guess, strategy that David Stearns deployed when he was still a GM for you all in terms of these prospects now coming up and making, your team, what they are. And being able to replace that high turnover. And David Stearns is now working his ass off to try to get the Mets into that kind of form as well. Obviously, It's year one. Didn't expect at any point, right? Especially after an abysmal May for the Mets, for them to even be in contention at this point. But here we are. And I think it's a testament for David Stearns working countless hours to try to mitigate also that turnover that the Mets have had ever since the start of the season, because this is a completely different ball club, different names, minus the core guys. And here we are. So you mentioned Koenig, right? And he's going to be the starter for game 2.
Mm-hmm.
We will be going to game 2 in here just a couple hours, and we're going to be seeing this game tonight. Obviously, a must win for the New York Mets.
Yep.
For you all, not a must win. You guys have your third seed clinched, and you are awaiting who's going to be the third wild card team in the NL. So that could be between the Braves, the Mets, or the Diamondbacks. This is a must win for the New York Mets. And I thought David Peterson, especially after a game 1 loss and having our best pitcher start, we would be out there throwing David Peterson. They made a decision to go with the veteran Jose Quintana. He's about 36 years old, has had an up and down season, but over the last 5 starts, he has been absolutely electric. I really am hoping for the best because it's always a wild card. And I always say this on every single one of my podcasts that I do, is that any single time Jose Quintana goes up there, he doesn't throw hard. If he's missing his spots, it's going to be a field day for the other team.
Yeah.
But he's been hitting his spots. He's been predominant with the up and in fastball, and he's been getting hitters off balance, which is the most important key, right? We don't know what the Brewers lineup is going to be today. I'm assuming they're going to throw out a similar rendition of what they had last night. But we will see. But in terms of the expectations for the Brewers and how they're approaching the rest of the series, especially going to game 2, as we're previewing this, Koenig is 9-4 this season with a 2.51 ERA.
Yep.
You mentioned that can be a starter.
Mm-hmm.
He can be a reliever. He's kind of a jack of all trades from what I hear.
Yep.
So what are the expectations in terms of the strategy that the Brewers might deploy here? Do you think he's going to go 4 or 5? Do you think they might preserve him for 1 or 2? Do you think he's an opener? What are you thinking there?
So I think Koenig is really, he's not much of a strikeout guy, a lot more of a ground out guy. I think really the hope is he makes it through 4.
Yep.
He has in the past, I think 2 starts ago, he made it through 5 2/3. He had a really great game, only like 1 run allowed. So I think there is potential there to see Jared Koenig actually become kind of morph into a starter possibly next season.
Mm-hmm.
But talking about today, I think honestly, our bullpen is pretty deep. We're probably going to go to the guys that have been struggling throughout the season. And something Chris and I talked about a little bit last night is what's the gamesmanship look like for the Brewers?
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, we kind of do decide a little bit of our destiny and who we play. And the Diamondbacks are our kryptonite. And well, actually just about every team we play in the playoffs, because every time we play someone, they end up making it to the World Series or winning it, which kind of blows. But, I think what we want to see from Pat Murphy here today is just the same sound decision-making that he's had all season. Just making sure that he can get those rotation guys in, maybe get some of those guys that might have had a rough end of the season,
right,
or just a bad season. And Hobie Milner, love Hobie, sorry, but he's struggling. But just trying to get the guys in the bullpen that might be down on their luck right now, and just trying to get them into postseason form.
Yep.
Not expecting an absolutely dominant pitching performance tonight. I think we're really going to rely on our bats like we have all season. One of the best offenses in the league. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. But I guess what are your expectations? How do the Mets beat the Brewers today?
The bats have to come alive. The bats have to come alive, and that's something that we've been saying. Obviously, they had a tremendous Phillies series. They took 3 of 4 from the inevitable, NL East division leaders. They locked up and clinched that spot in the NL East. They go down to Atlanta in game 1. The bats disappear. Luis Severino has a bad performance. You're thinking, okay, maybe it's just an outlier. They get rained out for the next 2 days. Extended rest. You head into Milwaukee. Game 1, you have your ace on the mound, Sean Manaea. He falters, and the bats again just get shut down by Frankie Montas. And if you want to be a contender for the playoffs, and if you want to solidify your stance in these playoffs, you have to hit the baseball, and you have to hit pitchers that you should hit. I mean, no disrespect to you all, no disrespect to Frankie Montas, but there's absolutely no way he should go out there and be shutting down, especially the top half of this lineup. And that's something that we've been seeing in terms of this whole season with the Mets is the inconsistencies with the bats. The overall statistics support them being a top 10 offense. But in years prior, the pattern that I've seen when it's crunch time, when the Mets need a win or they need to string a few wins together in order to make that, clinch that spot, especially going back to 2022, and everybody doesn't want to talk about it, but we have to make the point is that this team, and especially these core of players in Pete Alonso and Brandon Nimmo, namely, obviously we have a veteran in JD Martinez who's struggling right now. I honestly think it's time to move on, and I think that he is deserving of bench time at all costs. So we'll see if he's going to actually be in the starting lineup. I don't think he is. I think he's going to be coming off the bench, if anything. But again, the bats have to come alive. This Mets team needs to show me that when it's time to string wins together, because the most realistic outlook for me and what I'm gathering in terms of my math for the Mets to make a serious bid at this wild card spot is they need to take 3 of the next 4.
Yeah.
Preferably with how badly over the past few years, even maybe 5-6 years going back against the Braves that they've been struggling at Truist Park. It's an abysmal record, 25-37 over there.
Brutal.
They need to take the next 2 in this Brewers series. And you talk a lot about the gamesmanship of the Brewers, and it's kind of like a mind game for the Brewers. Yes, you want to go out there, you want to get the guys right, you want to get them into form, like you said, but also I can't help but wonder if they have it in the back of their minds that, listen, we would rather see this this Mets team that we have quite literally owned over the last couple of seasons back at our place for a potential first-round matchup instead of a sneaky team like the Diamondbacks, like you said, a team like the Braves that can always turn it on with the amount of talent that they have. So again, you got to wonder if the Brewers are sitting there and looking at this math as well and saying, well, we'd rather just see the Mets again. They'd rather just see the Mets come back onto a flight back to Milwaukee after Atlanta after the season ends, and we'll take care of business then. But again, we'll see. I think that, I don't think you can be thinking too far ahead if you're the Brewers at that point.
No, and I think something that's also concerning for the Brewers is that we faced the Diamondbacks. I think it was, I want to say 7 of the last 10 games or so. Or we played them 7 times in the last 2 weeks. So Diamondbacks are very familiar with where the Brewers are at right now, and we're very familiar with the Diamondbacks. The only team that kind of remains a mystery to us in terms of we haven't played them the past month or so are the Braves. So there's an era of like, okay, we can choose between the Mets and the Diamondbacks in terms of who we're going to play. But also, if we play the Braves, that's also a little bit of an inherent risk as well, because we just haven't seen them as much throughout the season, being outside our division. So it'll be interesting to see regardless, but very excited for where you guys at. And just to throw some stats around, I think prior to today, before the game start, Mets have a 70% chance of making the playoffs. The Braves have a 30% chance.
Diamondbacks.
Yes. Apologize. And the Braves have a 90% chance. So how do you feel about that going in? I mean, you're not in the worst spot, but I mean, from the way you talk about where the Mets are at right now, there's definitely an air of caution and concern for where the team is at.
Well, I've done these mathematical scenarios in my head. We talked about it as well, obviously, before we came onto this podcast. The Mets still control their own destiny. As shocking as it is with the last 2 losses between the Braves and the Brewers, the Mets still control their own destiny. Yes, they need some help, right? But at the end of the day, there's a couple of different scenarios which would have the Mets making the playoffs. Their best bet is obviously winning out in Milwaukee and hoping that the Padres, who just locked up the 1 seed in the wild card for the NL, are able to take at least one more from the Diamondbacks in their respective series.
Yep.
That would, have the Mets clinching in Milwaukee. Let's just say the Mets win the next 2, the Diamondbacks win the next 2. Well, then at that point, obviously, the Diamondbacks season is over. We all know the Mets have the advantage in terms of the actual head-to-head numbers. So they have the advantage over the Diamondbacks should there be a tie. And the Mets at that point would need to take at least one game of the 2 in Atlanta, whether it's the first one or the second one. It doesn't matter because that would put them at an even tie, and the Mets would therefore eliminate the Diamondbacks. I personally don't want to go into Atlanta knowing how much of a house of horrors it has been for the New York Mets over the past couple of years. Actually, just going back to 2-3 decades, to be honest with you, between these two teams. I don't want to play meaningful baseball in Atlanta. I really don't. I'd prefer to get that outside help, and I'd prefer the Mets just take care of business in Milwaukee.
Absolutely.
But if we have to go back out there in Atlanta, so be it. The pitching configuration for the New York Mets is going to be interesting. Obviously, Jose Quintana is going today. Depending on if we win and depending on what happens to the Diamondbacks game, it'd be interesting to see if the Mets are going to throw David Peterson tomorrow or Luis Severino. But that's my last question to you here in terms of what you expect from the Brewers lineup the rest of the way. Obviously, there's 4 more games in this season for the New York Mets, only 2 for you all, obviously with our postponement. Are you expecting to see the likes of Jackson Chourio, Adames, and Rhys Hoskins today and tomorrow? Are you expecting them to see them today and the off day tomorrow? Because the Brewers do have a short turnaround in terms of once this series ends and the actual first round of the playoffs starting, there's not too much time, right, in between those 2 series before the Brewers are back into action.
Yeah.
Do you risk someone getting hit by a pitch in the wrong spot, maybe on the hand and something like that? There's always those sort of fears, especially with these guys that have been producing for you all season. I'm not sure, and that's why I want to ask you what type of risk they're going to take, especially with their lineup.
Sure. I mean, part of that fear came alive yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw Sal Frelick, absolute beast of just amazing baseball player, and an absolute stud out in left field. Runs into the cage on the right on the sideline and just demolished his hip. We're still waiting on MRIs. Hopefully, we'll get the results prior to game time. Hopefully, so you're either going to see a whole bunch of happy Brewers fans waiting for him to hold down that spot out there as a terrific left fielder, or we're going to be really panicking. Yeah. I mean, we do have depth at outfield, thank God. Garrett Mitchell, I think, can really kind of sub in there. Same with Chourio, he can play out there as well. Definitely concerning, though. I still think, though, looking back historically, or at least the past 6 out of the 7 years we've been in the playoffs, whenever the Brewers lose going into the playoffs, whether it's because we just don't care and we have our seed locked down, or if we're, just eking into the wild card, when we lose a series going into the playoffs, we always exit in the wild card.
Okay.
I believe the last time going into the playoffs where we had actually won the previous series, we won the wild card round and then made it to the divisional round. So I think as a Brewers organization, obviously every team is different, but the organizations aren't. And sometimes you just have that luck of you have to kind of overcome these curses as a franchise. And sadly, I'm not sure. I'm always worried heading into the playoffs because we always seem to be playing the next World Series champion. But as a Brewers fan, you really hope that we can at least not even sweep the series, but just at least get a win, head into the postseason with a little bit of steam behind us, and just hope that we can keep that rolling and maybe sustain a longer playoff run than we've ever had. Because, God, as a Brewers fan, we have just sucked it up in the playoffs. But I'm very excited for that.
And that's actually a great point by you. And this is kind of how we'll close this off. And that's a great point because, you take a look at baseball and really any sport in general. You talk about football as well. The same thing can be said is that who gets hot and who carries that momentum from the end of the regular season into the playoffs.
Yep.
We've seen it the last 2 seasons in the Diamondbacks reaching the World Series off a wild card, right? Mm-hmm. We've seen the Phillies the season prior reach the World Series off of a wild card because they got hot at the right time.
Yeah.
It is something to where you pointed out, even if you have a spot clinched, taking that last series could do wonders in terms of the momentum and just the overall feeling and the vibes that are in the clubhouse. So again, not something you want to hear if you're a Mets fan. Obviously, the Mets put themselves in a brutal position by losing game 1 of this series. Hopefully for us, we bounce back, take the next 2 heading into Atlanta. Hopefully we get the outside help. But again, Logan, I appreciate you. Thank you for hopping on the podcast. I hope this is a great game. Again, we'll be at the game, so hopefully I'll be cheering and Logan will be coming back a little bit sad. But again, thank you for joining me on the podcast, and hopefully we'll have you back on here. Maybe we're talking about a potential
Brewers
Mets
postseason run.
Well, Mets versus Brewers
Okay.
series. All right, take it easy, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you all. This is CP and Logan giving you all a little bit of a preview before Game 2 in Milwaukee between the Mets and Brewers. Peace.
Thank you for watching the True Mets Talk podcast. Make sure you're tapping on that notifications button and checking out all the latest content on the channel. Thank you.